how come water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants are always built next to rivers and streams? Before a weather event, what are you and what are the people at Aqua doing to prepare for a storm? I am so excited to have this panel come together today, and today is Extreme Weather Roundtable, when the 100-year storm comes every year. I'm Christine Gonzalez, Senior Project Manager and Storage Tank Queen at NTech Engineering. I get to wear my crown today. John, did you know I had a crown? I don't think you knew I had a crown. I didn't wear it last week. Our panel also has two other folks from NTech. I've got my colleague, Rob Horvath. He's the Regional Director of NTech's Pittsburgh office, and he remembers flooding from Hurricane Ivan back in 2004. Eric Moore, he's also with NTech. He worked alongside NTech for many years while he was the Executive Director at the West Branch Regional Authority, and he's been with NTech for about 2 years now as a project manager. Our panels work so well because of the variety of viewpoints that we get, and we love featuring our friends and industry folks. So today we've got Joe Gallagher. He's the manager of electrical maintenance with Aqua, Pennsylvania, mainly on the water side. He's been there for 43 years, and I've known Joe since I was a co-op at Aqua 31 years ago. Very long time ago. So welcome, Joe. We've also got John Bright. I met John last week out at a job site. So he's the field supervisor with Aqua, Pennsylvania on the wastewater side. And John, I didn't get a chance to check with you, but how many years of experience do you have doing this sort of stuff when it comes to operations for utilities?
I spent 16 years operating for 2 different municipalities, and then almost 2 years now with Aqua. So I have definitely seen quite a bit.
Excellent. And finally, we have Mike Snyder. He's a coordinator of PAWarn, and I didn't know what it stood for. It's Pennsylvania Water Wastewater Agency Response Network. And he also owns MHS Consulting Services, specializing in security and emergency preparedness. And Mike, you've got what, about 20 years of experience in this industry?
Right, about 20 years. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So these roundtables, they're all about you. Well, not my panel, you, the audience. We want to answer your questions. We want to hear what struggles you're having. And one way I like to do that is by starting with a poll. So I'm going to throw this poll out to our audience. And what we're going to do is find out what extreme weather events keep you up at night. So it's multiple choice. If it's all of them, go ahead and respond to all of them. We've got a bunch of different choices there. So I'm curious from my panel, looking at the poll, what keeps you guys up at night? John, what's the biggest struggle that you guys have? Which one of these?
Definitely flooding. I need one that has rain and wind mixed together.
Ah, okay.
When you get the wind for the follows, you're doomed to have some power failures.
Okay. Eric, what about you? What seems to be most troublesome for when you were back doing this stuff for you or even for your clients now?
Oh, well, Muncie was one of the areas that we served, and it was about a 60% flood zone in the downtown, and Montgomery wasn't much better. So we were on either side of the Susquehanna River, just south and east of Williamsport. So when the river came up, we had to make sure that we had staff and equipment spread on both sides of the river, because invariably the approach to the bridge across the river would flood. And so if we didn't have people on both sides, one system would be neglected. And there was no easy way to get around that didn't include that bridge. It was about a 40-minute drive to get around. So it was always on our mind. But wind, we had a few straight line wind events that caused some havoc, including knocking out all of our alarm systems. So we had all the alarm systems for, I think it was Muncie Water System at that point we were operating by contract, all came to one location. And then from that central server, it would send the alarms out. Well, when the tree came down and took out the T1 line, now we had no alarms. So we had to go to each site on a rotating basis until the event was over and we could get the communications back up.
Yeah. That's amazing and horrendous. In fact, these extreme weather events, I find them both fascinating and just amazing to see what Mother Nature can do, but also just horrible, horrible. Okay, so thank you to our, looks like almost everyone has voted at this point. So I'm going to share the results with you. And similar to what a few of our panelists said, so it looks like flooding is number one. 84% of the people voted for flooding. Number two, power outages, and 3 and 4 were ice and snow and wind. Okay, cool. That's very, very helpful. So thank you very much to our audience. Joe, I want to start with you. And as we were getting started, we shared a bunch of those photos of your Pickering plant. So I'm always curious, before a weather event like we had, I guess it was Tropical Storm Ida by the time it got to us. Beforehand, what are you and what are the people at Aqua doing to prepare for a storm like that?
Well, typically, we have a group get together depending on what the expected severity is. We might just be the production and control center group, maybe get treatment involved, and we'll try to assess what the impact's going to be. I mean, Ida was kind of a surprise for a lot of people, but I happened to be away that weekend when it came, so I missed the worst of it. But we'll typically look at some facilities that we can shut down. We have a good interconnection of systems, so we might be able to turn 4 or 5 wells off in one area where we expect a big impact from a storm and ride it through. And so instead of having to respond to it right away, we can wait for the storm to clear out and go. So, and if we lose communications, because with the 4 log rules, if you don't have communications for a well site, it's applying chemicals for over 4 hours. You have to have someone on site, either shut it down or monitor it. So we'll shut off some facilities proactively, won't have an impact on the system demand or anything. And then if we do lose communications, we'll try and track that through that 4-hour period, make the required calls to the carriers and try and get something restored, and manage that timeline also. So we do have to get someone out, either shut the facility down or park somebody there to maintain operations until skate is back online again.
Okay, and with the Pickering plant, so whole plant is flooded. No one can get in there for like 2 days. And
Right.
once you could, what was the biggest damage you saw from all that flooding? To like what components? What was the worst damage?
Well, that's what we're the entire first floor and also the basement. So the filter galleries, all the pipe galleries for the filters, all the instrumentation, turbidity, loss of head, rate of flow, transmitters, everything was underwater there. All the electrical switch gear was underwater also. So we had to do initially just clean up all the mud and the fish and everything else was in the way, and then safely isolate all the electrical equipment, and start doing the triage on whatever we could. Also, the contractor did a great job bringing in spare equipment and rental equipment to help get things back online. Unfortunately, a lot of our spare parts were on the first floor also, so we had to scrounge around for parts from some other facilities, other plants, and also vendors. We had a great network of vendors that helped out, bringing in relays and circuit breakers and motor starters. A couple of motors had to get turned around after being underwater, sent out to a motor shop to get clean, dipped, and baked, they call it. They take it apart, dry it out, dip it again in varnish, replace the bearings. And they able to turn them around in 2 days, which was really impressive. So we had a great amount of cooperation between a whole lot of parties that make for a quick turnaround.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm curious, John, with Ida, you take care of a bunch of the wastewater facilities for Aqua. What sort of effects did you see at the different facilities out there?
Well, we the wastewater side, we really handled it pretty well by luck, I think, because we didn't have the big downpours in our areas. We had 2 plants we couldn't get to overnight until flooding resided, but we did pretty well. I mean, you're asking about preparation before. We have a little bit of a playbook that we use that leading up to the event. With Ida, we didn't have the lead time, I think, that we would with some bigger storms, and that kind of caught us with our pants down a little bit. But typically, leading up to it, We, check generator fuels, make sure everything's topped off, ready to go. Schedule chemical deliveries ahead of time. So we're not trying to get chemicals delivered during a flood. And I can't emphasize enough the paperwork, having your emergency contact lists, vendors, providers, everything right in hand so you can, when the time's needed, you can have them.
Now, is that something where, like, even in your cell phone, you've got all the important people in here, so you can just touch it and they're right there for you?
Yeah, I mean, my phone has so many numbers on it. Sometimes I forget what they are, but it's what you have to do. You have to do it, and then having this pocket computer right here, you can pull up emails and everything else. But if you have everything in a little binder or something right there in front of you, it makes life so much easier.
Okay, good point. Now, Eric, I see you nodding your head and smiling at what John had just shared. What's your experience been like?
I would say they're great as long as they're plugged in and they have power or have power. So we would keep a spare emergency list in the trucks just so that we have a extra place. I had one event where I knew I was going to be staying overnight at the plant essentially, and my charger cable died. I mean, it was just the cable. And so I was operating about 2% battery come morning time. But, it's something you need to be cognizant of, and you can't always plan for it. But having multiple means of having those contacts available to you is essential.
Mm-hmm. Yes, actually having them in your phone. It's something having it in your phone and a printed copy. There's your backup right there.
Right. Yeah, we have the same thing with our crews have books with contact numbers, vendors, service repairs for emergency generators and those kind of things. So we have that available to everyone out in the field, in addition to what's on the cell phones. Mm-hmm. As part of the SOP we have too for storm response.
Yeah. Now, speaking of storm responses, I've heard that there's like I don't know, workshops or like dry runs you can do with those sort of things. Mike Snyder, that's the word I'm looking for. Tabletops. Yeah, Mike Snyder, do you ever lead those or get involved with those?
Yes, I in fact I've done a couple with Aqua last couple of years, but yeah, that's something I do on my consulting side where we sit down with the emergency response team from the utility and kind of talk about what scenarios they might want to practice going over, and I tell you what, they're invaluable. I learn something every time we do one, and I've done many over the years, and something always comes up that you haven't thought about before, and it's a real good tool to have and to practice, and also test your ERP. I mean, we just went through the ERP updates because of WIA, and now I think it's time to test them with a tabletop exercise. Make sure all your contact information is in there that you need, and all your corrective action plans are there and workable, and so on and so forth. So I'm a big believer in tabletops.
Mike, remind for people who are just learning these acronyms, ERP, what does that stand for?
Emergency response plan.
Okay. Like in my mind, I'm like, it should be simple. And I thought that's what it was, but I just like to double check for everybody.
Yeah, so everybody had to, everybody over 3,300 population had to update their ERP by, well, the small systems December 31st of this year. But so, it's great to have that binder there and have it electronically and all that. But if you don't test it and then you have an emergency and a critical contact isn't in there, maybe, for example, do you have the local office of the FBI in there? If you get hacked, that's a federal crime, and you need to notify the FBI. Do you have that in there? I mean, there's sometimes contacts you wouldn't think of on a daily basis that really need to be in there, for a certain situation. So,
yeah, good point.
And then your corrective actions, and with all the retirements coming up, corrective actions are really important to be written down, and so someone else who comes in to replace a retiree can see how to handle that situation.
Yeah. Rob, you had a comment?
Yeah, just, one of these things, that Mike's alluded to as far as having these plans, and testing them. I've been really hammering people as far as, a lot of these facilities are putting in generators, or we're purchasing portable generators, hammering the idea that, look, practice with it. Run on full load. Run your facility on full load on your generator. Don't just let it sit there and exercise on some regular interval. actually run your facility on full load and make sure you know what happens when you do. When in the plant that I used to be responsible for, we used to exercise our generator every single week and never had a problem with it until we lost both of our feeds one day, and we found out that the entire plant wasn't set up to run on the generator. So we learned a lot of things when that happened, but we learned it when it happened rather than knowing going in. And had we been on some regular interval, purposefully switching over, transferring the plant to that feed, we would have known a lot more going in. So, again, having an SOP for hooking a portable generator up to a pump station is one thing, and actually having the guys go out there and pull the cables and get everything hooked up and transfer over to that power is really important. That becomes a common practice for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Eric?
As a part of our upgrading of the system back in the Muncie and Montgomery at West Branch, we went to every one of the 12 pump stations and we installed a common plug just for the generators. We didn't have enough generators, mobile generators, to cover all of the sites. So we knew, essentially, we did some math and figured out how long could each one run before it had to be pumped down. And then to avoid having it's a lot more difficult to wire one of those generators in than you might think, especially with the 3-phase setup. So having a plug makes it so much easier, and it's not very expensive in the grand scheme of things. We also put in the valve vaults, or if we didn't have a valve vault, we installed one in a buried sense, a connection point for a pump on wheels. So as a part of our response, we had several generators on wheels, but sometimes the electrical stuff is fried if you have a lightning strike, or in one case, we had a tractor trailer run over our sewer pump station, flatten it. And so all the controls and the equipment weren't going to run. So you have a portable pump of adequate size. So that emergency response planning seems tedious when you do it, but you really need to get down in the weeds and look at what equipment you need and what little things you can do that can save a ton of time, like standardizing your plugs and putting them at each station.
It seems so simple, but my God, it really helps. John, you had a comment you want to share?
Yeah, I was just going to share something what Eric just said. In my past municipal life, we would practice setting up the Goblin bypass pump at pump stations. We'd be given a scenario, and we already had a little notebook with what pieces of hose we would need at each pump station. But we'd be given a scenario, and we'd have to run out and set it up, and our supervisor would time us. And at the time, of course, we thought that was a little overboard, but we all knew how to set the pump up. We could do it. And I remember one night we had an emergency at our biggest pump station, and myself and another operator, we were able to get everything set up and no worries. So it's all about good reps.
So cool. I love it. Because it's like the operators, the events, the races that they have at the conferences. But here, this matters. Like, it didn't dawn on me that could really, really matter and save your plan. That's so cool. I love it. Joe, did you have a comment?
Yes, I want to echo what I was mentioning about the emergency response plan and the SOPs and planning. As we were working on the Pickering rehab, getting everything back from the storm, the bulk of the crew within Aqua that was responding to the issue actually worked on those plans. So even though the book got washed away in the flood, we all knew what was there because we helped work on it. So the coordination response was really well, and everything kind of just flowed. And it's that kind of experience you get from practicing the EOPs that when it happens, instead of having to look at the book and try and read it, it's somewhat more fresh in your head, and you can recall it a lot quicker. And you have more than a couple of people that worked on it. All those get together and add their piece. So it definitely did help us out in Pickering with the quick turnaround. Better smooth. It was 2 weeks, 12-hour days. Everyone was working with. Did well, and got it back with nobody lost their mind.
Rob?
Yeah, Joe, you mentioned earlier about having your vendors lined up and how many people came to your aid when you guys had the situation on Pickering. I was relatively new in the facility when we had the Ivan event happen. I was blown away by how many, by the relationships we had with vendors. I mean, we had blowers and pumps. Everything was three stories down when we flooded. So every single one of those motors had to be pulled and brought back, pulled, baked, cleaned up, and brought back. And I was amazed at how quickly those folks were able to supply us and support us. And it was all, we knew exactly who to call. We knew exactly how to get everything rolling. And it was truly amazing to me how that worked out. And it was all because of the relationships we had with those folks.
Yeah, I agree. Maintaining a good relationship is great with contractors and vendors. I mean, they respond us really well. And I also had, I was away that weekend, like I said, but my phone was going off with some of those contractors and vendors. So you need some help. I hear you have a problem. So they're reaching out to us because, they know how critical equipment is, and they do have a good relationship with us. So we had a really good response, and we weren't the only ones in trouble either. So that's the other thing. It's a lot of other people were looking for pumps and motors, and
Right.
sometimes
Yeah,
you get to the top of the list if you have a good relationship.
Well, speaking of equipment and help, Mike Snyder, I think this is when Pennsylvania PAWarn comes into play. So for anyone in the audience who's not familiar with PAWarn, can you give us an explanation of what it is and how it works?
Yeah, PAWarn, I always describe it as just think of, it's very similar to what the electric companies have done for years. When there's a power outage, they bring in crews from all over the region or from other states or whatever to restore power. PAWarn's built on the same principle. If we have a water or wastewater system in trouble, they can contact PAWarn and we'll find other utilities in the area or outside the area, depending on how severe the situation is, to provide resources to that utility. So it's, water and wastewater utilities throughout Pennsylvania helping each other during emergencies. And, I know that a lot of systems have had this in place for years, handshake agreements with their neighboring system to say, hey, I'll help you out if you help me out. And it's worked great. The problem is with today's storms, many times they're regional storms. And so your neighbors ends up being under the same duress you're under and really can't help you. And that's where PAWarn really comes into play, because we can bring resources from Western Pennsylvania into Eastern Pennsylvania or Central Pennsylvania in either direction. And also every state in the country now has a WARN network, so we can pull resources from other states too, if need be. So it's really good. If you're not a PAWarn member too, and you're on this webinar, really think about joining, because it really unites us too as an industry. Right now, we're working with EPA and AWWA to get this supply chain, these issues, resolved, because, we have out west, we have systems getting delayed deliveries with chlorine gas, and I mean that's our primary disinfectant. We can't have that, and so we get involved a lot in as a liaison between utilities and regulators and so on and so forth to try to solve important issues in our industry too. So please think about joining if you're not a member. It's we have a modest dues. It's a half a cent per population served. So if for smaller systems, if you're under 7,000 population served, your annual dues are $35. So and it kind of goes up from there. But it's just to have us, you can call if you need us. I think helps a lot of managers sleep better at night. I think just knowing there's help, phone call away type thing.
Yeah, exactly. Eric.
One of the reasons I found over the years talking with different municipalities about PAWarn and trying to inspire them to join up, they would talk about helping their neighbors, but they were always concerned about the insurance of what would happen, workers' compensation, those sorts of things. If you send your guys over to help your neighbor and they get injured during that process. So it seemed to me that there was at least some kind of agreement or setup that would cover that issue. Is that correct, Mike?
That's correct. We have a mutual aid agreement that we ask every utility to sign. And basically it covers things like, whose workers' comp covers you if you go to another utility to help out. And it also indemnifies systems that, it's based on kind of the Good Samaritan Act, where if you go to help a system and something goes wrong beyond your control, that system can't turn around and sue you for that. So there's a lot of important information within that document. And that's why, one of the problems we run into with PAWarn was, I just just got off a webinar with the Pennsylvania Bar Association talking with attorneys. And what I said to them was, when that mutual aid agreement's handed to you from the authority board or water system board or wastewater board, don't try and change it, because everybody has to work under the same agreement. And then even if you don't agree with maybe a sentence or two in the mutual aid agreement, don't tell the utility not to join because of that, because the benefits far outweigh, any sentence or two in the agreement you might not agree with. So yeah, it's important that we have that agreement in place. Just like Eric said, I mean, you can't worry about workers' comp and those kind of things in an emergency situation, because you can't be delayed. You have to respond immediately. So.
And I'm curious. So Mike, what is the website for PAWarn?
It's www.PAWarn.org.
Oh,
And
it's so
the cool thing about the website is once you become a member, we built a page for you in the secure side of the website, so you have to log into it then. And then within that network, within the secure side of the website, if you need something at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night, the contact information for that utility that has what you need is in there, and it's there 24/7. So, it's a great resource to have. Some utilities have been kind enough to list their resources that they can share on the website, so you can actually query if you need a water buffalo or something like that. You can query for it, see who has it and how far away they are and that kind of thing. So it's pretty slick.
excellent. Anyone else on the panel with experiences with Pennsylvania WARN, or any good stories to share there of help that you've gotten? Okay.
I've watched this supply side issue out west here, and I'm amazed at what the impact has been about having a common, a united front to deal with this. And PAWarn and AWWA, and just the fact that they were able to all come together and provide a united front in support of the systems has been amazing.
So you're talking about the supply chain issues?
Yeah, the issue with the chlorine, and just the fact that
preview, ding, 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 ding. Our next roundtable just scheduled is for November 18th, Thursday at 2 p.m. and it's supply chain. Help! My supply chain is broken. So it's a
and I think that was one of those where we started having these conversations, and I've Mike and I cross paths pretty regularly. And this came up and people started expressing concern. I'm like, did you talk to PAWarn? And most of them were like, no, I mean, you really think? I'm like, yeah, I think you should at least give them a heads up. So, and obviously some others took the same approach, and having them running point as far as getting everybody together and on the same page and communicating. I mean, they were able to put a lot of pressure on these suppliers to get this resolved.
excellent. Okay, I'm going to read a few comments we got in from our audience. So this is from James Baer, who says, creating a standard operating procedure that all employees are familiar with during extreme weather events is crucial in case leadership is unable to get back to the facilities. So that ties in with what Joe Gallagher had shared as far as everyone being familiar with emergency preparedness and what all needs to be done. James also mentions making sure all safety procedures are followed is also extremely important. People tend to rush in with emergency situations, and water and electricity are not a good mixture in flooding conditions. So taking the time to do a pre-job safety checklist with staff can prevent serious injuries. So Joe, from the electrical side, any stories to share about that?
Well, lockout tagout still counts when you're doing emergency response, and we did that. We were locking things out and making sure everyone else knew who was responsible for that. And as there might have been 3 or 4 different people working on the pump end of the equipment or the motor end, so everyone had to be aware and who was responsible for it once everything was supposed to be restored to make sure it's safe to turn the power back on. So that was a coordinated effort that we didn't overlook.
Yeah, good point. Another comment from Dale Miller. Speaking of Dale, from NTEC, he'll be on our next roundtable on supply chain issues. He suggests that having a portable generator or pump is great. Make sure you have a truck big enough to tow it. It doesn't do you much good if you can't move it. Lots of good salient advice there. From Timothy Boyd, great idea to practice emergency procedures. 2 a.m. in the rain is not the ideal time to learn, so thank you. Any other comments from our panel on any of these things? Yes, John?
I just wanted to point out the question about safety. I know we're told to ditch the wastewater warrior mentality when it comes to these storms and events. The operators are trained to, everything we can do to stop that SSO or whatever. And we really have to take a step back, and, no one's life's worth saving an SSO. We got to get their priorities right. So that's a big thing we talk about in our briefing before an event comes. Don't try to be the hero that goes through the flooded waters. Don't try to be the guy that transfers power with a 2x4 hanging out the door. I don't know anything about that. But we just got to take a step back and think about safety.
Because the water never looks that bad, does it? But you just don't know what's under it, or how strong it is, or oh my
How
God.
deep it is.
Yeah, how deep it is. Good point. Eric?
It's also important to be aware of what wind can do. It's not just the water. I responded to a pump station that was in the flood zone, so everything was elevated, but they didn't build a platform, so that was their engineer's fault. But so we were on a step ladder, myself and the operator, opening a panel door that was 4x3 in 35-mile-an-hour winds. It almost took him, and he's a bigger boy than I am, I almost took him right off the ladder. I had to grab him by the legs and hold on, just from the force of the wind. So when you're out there and you're dealing with wind and water and electricity all at the same time, safety is absolutely important.
Good point. Yeah, so a question from our audience. This is from Bill Ross. So with respect to flooding, how big of a factor is significantly reduced impervious coverage areas, specifically in urban and suburban locations? So anyone have experience, Eric, designing that and understanding how that all works?
Everyone talks about it, and you go through it in the development side of our business, and everyone complains about having to take all these stormwater management requirements into account. But at the end of the day, it really magnifies the effect, especially when we have this changing, more severe weather. The amount of rain is coming down faster. Same amount of rain in a faster time frame. And if it can't get into the ground, it's going to then flood worse. And so part of what we were looking at in Muncie, we had a resilience organization that was kind of a loose organization of the borough and all the other folks that had stakeholder status, the DEP folks from the federal level. And we looked at what could we do, because the downtown of Muncie was so flood prone. And it really boiled down to the streams coming into town as well as the river. And the only way to address those was to try to find a way to get the water to either go into the ground faster or to delay it so it didn't all arrive at the same time. And years of paving and not paying attention to that issue concentrates the water, it makes it come faster, it can't get out into the river or down through the stream, and so your flooding is magnified by that. And that bigger study to look at what could we do to slow the water down at that point, you're spending a lot of money and you need a lot of land area. So the sins of the past we're paying for, and it's important to not continue to commit those sins as development occurs.
John, I see you smiling, and actually I'm reminded of being out at your pump station last week, and huge townhouse development. If you're familiar with the Valley Forge, Pennsylvania area, it's Chester Brook. Yep, and all the water apparently goes from Chester Brook down this lovely culvert at the back of your facility and right into the pump station, right?
Yeah, it's a bad setup for stormwater management. And then with the stream right beside it, we actually have there's a USGS flood gauge, I guess, there, and we get text alerts for when the stream starts coming up. And I remember there with Ida, it was we got the first one. It was like, 8 foot. And we got a 8.5 feet, then 10. Then all of a sudden it went to 18. And we all kind of clinched up and wasn't sure what was really going on, but the operator had already closed the floodgates. And at that point, it's in God's hands then. And we were within 2 inches of going over the floodgates into the station. So, and that station pumps average dry weather about 5 million a day. And the flow meter got submerged, so we don't have a true number, but we're guessing probably around 18 to 20 million that pumped.
God, wow. Any other stories to share about impervious stuff from Rob? Any design work that you've done or anything you've noticed over time?
No, I just, for a long time, there was a practice of building walls on either side to contain streams. And more recently, in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, a lot of places are really rethinking that and going back and tearing those walls out, and really opening up those streams and laying them back so that they have a little bit more of a natural, less focused flow path. So, I think some of the practices of the past have been basically debunked at this point, and a lot of people are going back, especially when these types of events happen, and looking for opportunities to do that, to improve those situations.
Yeah, good point. Any other stories about impervious areas?
You see a lot of places that used to be either farms or just wooded areas are filled up with townhouses right now. So a lot of areas been covered over.
Yep, and areas that never used to flood,
Right.
yeah, we're getting them. So it's just all the stuff's coming together, and it's horrendous.
But it used to flood before, but there weren't any houses there to get damaged.
Yes.
And now they
yeah.
do.
Well, and speaking of things getting damaged, so just a general question: how come water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants are always built next to rivers and streams? You're laughing at me, Rob. So pretend I'm a young engineer. I have no idea. I'm like, why the hell would you do that? This seems stupid. It's going to flood. Why do they do that, Rob?
Because that's where the water is.
Yeah.
And
The lowest
sewage
spot
flows
for the inlet.
downhill. Gets to the lowest spot.
That's lowest spot when you're talking about wastewater, and it's where the source is when you're talking about water, and pushing those things away from those areas. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does cost money, and a lot of times when you're citing something like that, that's the kind of spot you're looking for. So.
Okay, yeah. When I came into the industry, I always wondered. I'm like, that's just stupid. But I figured there's probably a reason, and it's money. It always comes down to the money, right?
Well, those guys who have the wastewater plant that they pump to, and have to pay to pump that rather than going gravity flow, are really glad on the days that it rains like that.
Eric, did you have a comment?
Only that money does tend to rule things. And so back in the day, it was almost an afterthought to have a sewage treatment plant, only when people complained. And so you put it where you could. So you put it down close to the river because that's, it flows downhill. And then it was on the less expensive land where people didn't want to build businesses and houses. And so you end up in the future, fast forwarding through all the different improvements to technology and requirements by the regulators. And when we built the regional plant for West Branch, we built it out of the flood zone completely. And we looked at, it cost us more money to pump up to that facility, but the amount of damage that the old plants had taken over the years rendered them useless. So instead of having the ability to upgrade a plant, as time goes on to fix the old stuff to meet the new regs, they didn't have much of an option because they were 10 feet under the flood zone. And every time the river came up, it was damaging the structures, it was damaging the equipment. And so having, if you added up all that damage over the years, it kind of pays for itself to get it out of the flood zone.
Good point. Interesting. Want to go back to our audience. A reminder, submit questions to the Q&A. I see we've got a bunch of different things that have come in. So let's go through them quickly. So Mike Snyder, question, does PAWarn have brochures and handouts that the Pennsylvania DEP can provide to the regulated community?
Yes, we do. I have brochures I can mail over to you. To just send me an email at Mike Snyder at PAWarn.org.
Yeah, so at the end of our at the end of this roundtable, I'll have everyone's email addresses. So if you want any information from Mike, have questions for him about PAWarn, you'll have his email address and send them over to him. Tori Morgan from NTEC has a couple comments. Make sure you have alternate fuel sources available. During past floods, fuel sources often become limited. She also mentions that the buddy system, this is something Eric had referenced, that's imperative during flooding and natural disaster responses. So important to have two people going out and doing any of these things. H. Miller, H. David, good to see you from NTEX. He says, utilize your GIS if you have one, along with historical data to predetermine flooding areas to help plan traffic access and times to fortify your facility. So that's a good point. He also mentions that and merge the current data from the National Weather Service on river stage predictions. So throw it out to my panel. You guys do any of that sort of stuff to check on expected flooding at your facilities, at your plants?
You know, it tracks
Joe?
stream gauge levels, like John had mentioned, and we have our SCADA systems hooked up to our dams to check the levels. And you know, so there's that. The weather, just checking in the weather. Sometimes, yeah, that's what we do prior to a storm. That's one thing we do. Also, is someone's responsible for tracking the weather and keeping us posted as it comes along.
Yeah, actually, I want to share my screen right now because there was something cool that I saw. Oops. So this was something that was on. I saw it on LinkedIn yesterday. So this was from the storm that just came through 2 days ago. This cool weather map. And so when I see it, I'm like, okay, green doesn't seem so bad. The light blue, that's 1 to 1.5 inches. It's when you get into the orange and red. Over here, I know New Jersey got really hit by that nor'easter. So I'm curious. Oh, this, of course, is showing us the flooding afterwards. So this is what NOAA ended up measuring. You guys, I guess, does that help after a storm? Do you ever look at that sort of stuff? I see you're shaking your head, Eric. Yes. Why would you look at it afterwards?
Well, essentially, when you're out in the field and you're fighting the battle to keep things running, you don't have a lot of time to wonder how much rain did we get. But you want to be able to do things like correlate amount of rain to the impact on your system. So as we got the new regional system up and running, one of the things I tasked the guys with was, when it rains, go out and tell me where the water sits. You know, are there manholes nearby? What other structures are nearby? You know, how do the roads get cut off? And try to build that local knowledge about how the water stands. And what we found, talking with the older guys who've been there for 30 plus years, was that it was changing. So as the weather becomes more severe, there's more ponding in different areas. The timing of things has been changing. So some of your old plans have to be revised as this continues to change. So just having that local knowledge of getting out there, driving around in the rain, it seems like a waste of time when you're super busy all the time, but it's not. It helps you understand where the impacts are going to hit. And certainly traffic, as H noted in his comment, we had planned it out. We sat down with a map, and I asked the guys, I said, I'm new to the area. Just pretend I don't know where I'm at. Show me what roads flood, when they flood, and then they argued it out about which roads flood when. And so, okay, that affected our timing for each pump station. Since we had 12 pump stations and 4 generators and a pump, we couldn't be there for all of them. We had to know how fast they would fill up, but also how long it took to get there, which ones we just weren't going to be able to get to, and then slowly adapt your plan over the years to do things like we put in a natural gas generator at one of the bigger pump stations instead of diesel, because we knew there would be times we just wouldn't be able to get to it, but it would still have to run according to DEP rules. We'd have to keep the pump station alive. So little things like that, but it all starts on the local level.
One of the things we do at, I'm sorry. One of the things we do at PAWarn is,
yeah, go ahead, Mike.
one of the things we do at PAWarn is we send out weather alerts with maps like that we get from the National Weather Service. So you can tell what's coming and how to prepare. And a lot of times we'll send along with the weather reports, the EPA checklist for that particular storm that tells you how to prepare, how to respond, and how to recover from such an event, which are helpful just to make sure that everything gets taken care of. I'm a big believer in checklists, but that's another benefit to PAWarn is we send those out. And when I first started doing it, I thought, am I just clogging people's emails, with weather that they could probably get other places. But it's like Eric said, when you're in the trenches, when you're out there, taking care of business, you don't have time to really look at the weather. Yeah, and so it's helpful that you can pull up a PAWarn on your phone or something to see what's coming in when you're in the field and things like that. So I've actually gotten a lot of feedback that they're very helpful having those weather reports sent out. So
excellent, great idea. And Eric, I love your stories. I love them. They're so I learned so much from your experiences. So thank you. And right now, my panel doesn't know this is coming, but we're going to play a little game that I like to call Extreme Weather Survivor. People who've been on the roundtable before know I like to have a little fun here. So I'm going to pose a question to our panel. And the question is, what is your most important tool during an extreme weather event? And then what we'll do after you each answer, we will have the audience pick who's going to be saved and put into the raft there. So Rob, you've played along before with us. So I'm going to start with you, Rob. So what's your most important tool?
Your people.
Your people, okay, a good answer.
Yeah, I think your people, your operators, and your experience, and that's a collective thing.
Okay. Well, and just so you know, there can't be any repeats. Sorry. Okay, John Bright. John Bright, what is your most important tool?
Well, that was my answer, but I think having a calm, cool, collective head, not panicking, take a deep breath and be able to really see the whole situation and not make a slapstick decision.
Okay. I thought you guys would say like a flashlight or a penknife or something. Okay, Joe Gallagher, what's your most important tool?
Well, there's two. One is the storage of snacks in your truck when you're out all night. So you have something neat. But I have a book that carries me all the time, account numbers for electric, account numbers for a SCADA, or emergency contacts for generator services. If I don't have that book with me during a storm, I get a little frantic.
Good answer. Mike Snyder, what's your most important tool?
I would say the cell phone. I mean, you just, you can't be without it these days, and you have to make sure that you have a way to charge it during a power outage too, with a solar backup or something. It's just an invaluable tool these days. You can do so much with it. If I had to pick one thing that I was going to carry with me, it would certainly be my cell phone these days.
Yeah, good point. Eric.
Always keep a clean pair of socks and underwear in your Jeep.
But how is that going to help you?
You never know what you're going to get into, and having to work for 24 hours straight with wet underpants is not fun.
Go bag.
Oh my God. Okay, so audience, it's up to you. Who is going to win the Extreme Weather Survivor? So I'm releasing the poll. You'll have maybe about 10 seconds to vote on who had the best answer. And really, I thought you'd be like a 5-in-1 Army Swiss knife or something like that. But I think Mike was pretty smart when it comes to the cell phone. I know, well, I can't survive without it. But then Rob, the people are important too. God, you all had good answers. Really.
Just glad you let me go first.
One thing I can speak to on some high wind events, we had a large outage in the areas. The cell phone towers we down, and you can't get a phone call through if you want. The text may still work, which I do know texting still does work sometimes when there's cell congestion. But even though it's a very important tool, sometimes it's not there when you need it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling and let's see who is going to be rescued. Congratulations, Rob. So you'll be rescued, and maybe you can put your hand out to Eric and help pull him along. Maybe there's room for 2 more on the raft. It's not a Titanic thing. So thank you all for playing along. I'm going to go back to our Q&A right now. Or actually, no, you know what? Joe, you just mentioned power outages. And when the power's out, you don't always have cell phone communication. What a pain in the ass that is. Or like extreme wind events, when the wind brings the lines down and all the roads are closed and you're trying to use your cell phone to figure out where you can, like, I'm speaking from experience. I couldn't get home one night from my parents' house to home, 5 miles. And it's because every road I took was blocked. It was blocked. It was blocked. There's these sheer winds that keep on coming through. So I'm curious out there, what are you guys seeing as far as sheer winds and how are they hurting you? So Eric, talk to us.
Well, we had a straight line wind event come through and it dropped dozens of trees in a focused area right on top of a 100-year-old water main that we discovered was poking up out of the ground where the stream at the stream crossing. And so we had to quickly get back in there, and thankfully the main branch that came down right next to where the water line was slightly exposed didn't break anything, but that 100-year-old pipe can be a little fragile sometimes. But yeah, the straight line wind events make me more nervous than the flooding events because you don't know what's going to happen.
Is there anything you can do to help your system or protect it in some way from these straight lines?
I did mention the clean underpants part, right? There's not much you can do because you don't know what trees are in the worst shape. You don't know where it's going to hit. And when it hits, it's a very focused area. It's not like the whole town. And sometimes you don't know what's going on. We had a bunch of trees come down that took out communications, and we were all running around thinking that, this was a big storm and it was affecting all the different sites, but it wasn't. It was one site. So they're tricky.
Because well, Joe, you mentioned if you lose your if you have these events, you may lose cell phone communication. So Joe, in that situation, if you lose cell phone and texting, how do you communicate?
You got to drive around and look for people.
Anyone have any ideas? Does that bring back walkie-talkies, John?
Yeah, our folks at the media treatment plant, they use walkie-talkies for a lot of daily stuff still. And they've used those before during storm events when people were staged at different locations.
We do have walkie-talkies at the plants all the time, and there's a couple of satellite phones that can get passed out if we're prepared for where the events are going to be. But just talking about winds, I had an issue. I'm just trying to get somewhere. If you're familiar with Valley Forge Park at all, where the chapel is, it might have been the same straight line winds Eric was talking about last summer. They forecasted 80-mile-an-hour winds coming through, a narrow band of it. And I was out in the road. I figured I might as well head to the PAWarn control center to help manage whatever this is going to cause, the problem is going to bring. And I was driving through Valley Forge Park, and a huge tree came down right in front of me, crossed the road, closed it down. I turned around, went back the other way, and another tree came down. I had to dodge that, almost hit my car, and then a tree in front of that got stuck. So there was 6 or 7 cars were trapped between these down trees with nowhere to go. I was, and then you said try to cell phone. I tried to make a cell phone call, and it was just I couldn't get a line through to talk to anybody because everyone else was trying to make the same calls.
Wait, so you're now in an office. So how did you get out?
I was driving at the time. I was driving to an office. I got.
Well, did you drive over grass or like how?
No, we had to wait till the park rangers finally showed up, and they directed us to maybe a fire road or something. That it was all blocked off, changed. So they had to unlock a couple gates first, and then they were able to get us out of there. But there were some huge trees that came down there.
God, can't imagine. Anyone else with experience with winds?
Okay. You're talking about communications. I was on a webinar a couple days ago with the PUC and PEMA, and there's a new thing that's out there. What's fairly new anyway. It's called Firstnet, and the state agencies are connected to it. And actually, according to the AT&T rep who was on the webinar, private utilities or private companies, including water and wastewater utilities, can sign up for this. And I don't really understand it inside and out, but apparently they have some kind of a network where I think they can take portable towers out. They're on trucks and stuff and locate them around the state. And this network allows you to communicate even when the normal cell towers are down. And it's very effective. I mean, the state, I think DEP has a cache of these phones that are, you have to have, I guess, a certain kind of chip in them or whatever to be able to communicate in that network. But it sounds like it's very, very effective. You know, it's a great backup. If you have a prolonged power outage and all the cell towers are down or whatever, you can communicate via this Firstnet network. And so it's something worth checking into. I'm going to put something out to our PAWarn members about it probably next week, so that any utility that's interested can get a couple of these phones or whatever and have them on hand in case we ever do have a prolonged power outage of weeks or months or whatever.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to go back to our audience. So here's a comment from Sean Arbaugh. Always good to work with local EMA. We needed some boats at one point to access a flooded pumping station to save it. So that's good. Question from Grant Izzo. Are there any proactive projects recommended to prevent flooding at the wastewater treatment plants? Like walls or raising sensitive equipment, etc. And actually, Dale Miller asked the same thing. Anyone looking at building high walls with floodgates around their facilities, since because of all the rain events we've been having lately? So, Rob, what are you seeing out there for our clients right now?
I love the idea that you showed earlier with the floodgates or the flood doors at facilities, especially something that's that simple. That can be added to an existing facility to protect it. You talk about the wall, and I think I saw the article about the New Jersey American facility that had the flood wall that protected it. It's always a question of how much money you're willing to spend, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting to see that work. And then the comment that the gentleman made about that flood wall was, that wall just paid for itself in one event, which makes a lot of sense. But it's that you can't always build a flood wall to protect a facility. It doesn't always work that way. So I mean, I think there's always common sense things you can do. That's the picture. There's always common sense things you can do to prepare and to try to set your facility up to be resilient in the event of an incident like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as Rob mentioned, we shared a few of these photos at the start. So this was Raritan, New Jersey American Water, $37 million project. But hey, their plant stayed dry and nothing happened to it. It kept working. And then John Bright with Aqua, this was their facility where I saw these funny steel doors. And I'm like, what are those things? And he said, oh, they're floodgates. So all the doors around this whole pump house all have them. And John, I can't remember, did you say a lot of your pump houses that have flooding issues, do they have this sort of doors?
No, this is the only one we have because it's such a critical facility. I saw in the chat, someone asked about the cost of them. I do not know that they were precede me, but we were, the purpose of our site meeting that I met Christine at was we're going to install a second redundant generator. And we're all talking about how it's going to be set up. And we're talking about the platform it needs to go on. And I kind of pointed to the fence where the leaf line was. I go, it needs to be a foot higher than this. So that's when we go to set all that stuff up. I think a foot higher than that flood mark would probably be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, and I keep referencing back to my experience there during Francis and Ivan. Francis was categorized as a 100-year storm, and we were fine after Francis. There was very little damage. Some local homes took some damage, but the facilities themselves were fine. It was 8-9 days later when the second one came through. It was categorized as, depending on who you listen to, as a 500, I think was the frequency that they referred to that storm when it hit us, on top of already saturated ground. And that event did things that, I mean, we had never seen water levels like that ever. I mean, it was incredible to see what we went through for that event. again, you have to ask yourself, how much are you going to plan for? You know, and there is a cost benefit. I don't know that any level of planning would have saved us from the damage we took that day on the day I've enrolled through. So, you know, again, you talked about transportation maps. Nobody ever imagined that there would be one bridge left that we could cross that didn't transect the township. I mean, literally, we had to have we were having a meeting on the radios at that time. How can we get to from one side to the other? Because it was all of our access points were taken, and you know, it was quite an experience, without a doubt.
How about, yeah, Eric, I'm like on the design side, what do you see? What's going on?
I haven't had any recent requests for it, but it's important to remember when you put flood doors on a building that there are other ways for water to get in. A community that shall remain nameless put flood doors on their belt filter press building and forgot that there was a big pipe that took the waste from the water that comes off the press back to the head of the plant. So when the flood event occurred, the water backed up through that big pipe and filled the inside of the building, which had these nice aluminum flood doors on it. So it was well contained, but unfortunately it flooded the whole building.
Oh my God. Question from our audience. Is anyone seeing anyone moving plants, moving pumping stations, moving things? Eric, what do you see?
Yeah, when we built the regional facility, now it's a few years ago now, 2012, actually built and finished in 2014. We took it outside of the 500-year flood, specifically considering that the climate was changing, that floods were getting worse, the damage that those buildings took. That was definitely a part of our math. And we did like a 40-year look to help look at the costs to make sure that it was cost justifiable. But it made a lot of sense to get it out. So if you have a situation where your plant is at the end of its life and you don't have the ability to expand on your site, you know, it's a viable option.
Yeah, now I'm curious, Joe, when Aqua experienced flooding at Pickering, I mean, so much stuff is damaged. Was there a thought, do we really want to rebuild parts of this or get it back online, or what was the thought process there?
That's the conversation right now. There's a certain amount we have to rebuild because we have to get the plant online. We can't just walk away and start building a new plant. It's going to take 3-4 years. But we are in the process now of, I guess, 3 stages. One is to get the existing plant operational the best we can. 2 is to make some great efforts to relocate the electrical gear above the floodplain. And 3rd would be to enlarge the plant. We have a east plant and a west plant on that ground. The east plant's much higher. So we're going to focus efforts on there for a new plant expansion as a long-term response.
Okay. Going back to questions from our audience, or actually comments. So Tim Lester with NTech, everyone will be happy to hear. He has a pair of clean socks in his car right now. Caitlin Warhite, she asks, what is your experience with how DEP exercises their regulatory discretion with regards to manhole overflows, basement backups that occur as a result of the extreme wet weather events? Does it seem to be changing since these events are happening more frequently? So who has a sense of what's going on there? Eric?
I haven't seen any change in their approach, but the approach that I've encountered over the years has always been fairly reasonable. Essentially, it's a force majeure event. When your system is flooded and it's beyond your reasonable control, you will have overflows. And when you have them, you need to record when they occur and how long they go, but you'll still get yelled at, but they won't fine you. So that's really the important part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else?
That's my experience as well. That seems like when events like this happen, there's a certain magnitude of event that they understand that there's not much that's out of your control.
Okay.
Even
John?
though they're happening more frequently, that's, in my experience, still true.
Okay.
Yeah,
John?
same thing. You know, they're reasonable about it as long as you're, you know, keep the data and upfront and honest with them. But we did have one facility that we do not own. We took receivership of it from the PUC, and it was destroyed during the Ida, and the inspector that came out actually issued a NOV to us because the plant was flooded. I mean, there's nothing we could have done, and I think we all kind of just shook our head on that one. So
Many operators have a strong sense of pride, and we don't like to get NOVs because it offends that pride, because we do our best to do it right. But they're still going to give you the NOV. And at the end of the day, the important part is, are they going to charge you a lot of money with fines and whatnot? So you got to live with the pride hit though.
Hey, remind me, what's NOV? What's that stand for?
Notice of violation.
Okay, all these acronyms. Oh, God. Okay, another question for, actually a comment from our audience. Joel George shares, we have CB radios in all of our trucks in case we lose cell phone service. So that's a good suggestion. Steve Wagner from NTech, how important is it to document, either with photos or video, the flood damage during and after an event? Does anyone employ drones to capture the magnitude? So anyone want to comment on that with either what you do or you've seen the different utilities do?
I'd say it's highly advisable from not just your insurance perspective, but if there's money to be had afterwards from a declaration of an emergency. Oftentimes you have this horrible flood and you're busy doing stuff and nobody's taking pictures, and it's hard to prove exactly where the water came and how high it came up. If you had someone with a drone or someone dedicated to taking photos, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I know
Anyone else?
at Aqua, doing the Pickering rehab, they bring somebody in to take pictures to document, what the damage was during the process, during the cleanup process. I can't remember if I think they just had someone come over with a drone too and do an overall shot of the property.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really important for us too, as far as having photo documentation of everything for, again, not necessarily what was happening, but, in the weeks and months that followed, having the documentation of what happened and what was going on and where things were was really important.
Okay. Let's see. And just a note to the people in the audience, I see Patty Kay from EPA. She shared a couple links there. So we've got EPA's Flood Resiliency Guide. I'll also send these links out to everyone, anyone who attended. I'll share them in an email afterwards. And also EPA's Incident Action Checklist. So thank you, Patty Kay. So good to have that information. Final question from our audience, and we'll go as long as you guys want in the audience. So Chris Cope asks, does the recent employment shortage, I know especially with operators, does that play a role in your emergency preparedness? And if so, how do you overcome this shortage? So anyone in the panel have any suggestions or comments, or do you just have many, many sleepless nights? What do you do? John, I see you smiling. What do you guys do?
no, we don't have a shortage of operators right now, which is a great thing. But a lot of our operators do travel a bit to get to work. So when events like this happen, I do have some sleepless nights hoping they can be able to respond to an alarm, be able to get to where they need to go. I know we deal with the Brandywine flooding, so hopefully we're on the right side of the Brandywine before it floods. And then we have facilities and people near Coatesville, Downingtown, which got hit really hard. So I know we had an operator who couldn't even get out. He almost got trapped driving around trying to get to a plant, and just had to turn back, and we'll tackle it tomorrow. That's that wastewater mentality I was talking about.
Yeah. Anyone ever use boats? Anyone ever use boats to get to places? Eric, I see you shaking your head. When did you use boats?
I never did, and no one under my direction ever did. I didn't see it, but apparently one of our guys would take his kayak out to get to the pump station that would get flooded on a regular basis, just to make sure that everything was okay. Because he was an old operator, he was dedicated, and even though everything was running automatically, he still would paddle out to it to make sure everything was okay. I always told him, don't do that, but I was never there to see it.
Aw, I love you operators. I mean, the dedication, and people don't see it. They don't know it. They don't hear these stories. I keep trying to tell them. So to wrap things up, I'm going to share, we're at 3:15 right now. So I'm going to share my screen one last time and We'll share with our audience everyone's contact, or actually no, first, if you enjoyed this roundtable and want even more, we've got several more planned, 3 through the end of the year. So I've already talked about help, my supply chain is broken. So that's for both water and wastewater. That's Thursday, November 18th. We've got a kick-ass panel for that one. Also Thursday, December 2nd on fog. In December, we're bringing back our beer with an engineer or operator or just someone who wants to drink a beer in the afternoon. And this one is nobody's perfect. You see what we did there? We spelled perfect wrong. So people sharing their stories of the biggest mistakes they made and are willing to tell us about. So if you're interested in signing up for these roundtables or watching past ones, we have all the tapes recorded. You can go to ntecheng.com. Across the top, there's a menu, look for resources, and drop down menu, you'll see roundtables there. So huge thank you to my panel. I knew this would be fun and interesting and educational. So big thanks to Rob Horvat and Eric Moore with NTech. With Aqua, loved hearing the stories from Joe Gallagher and John Bright, and Pennsylvania PAWarn, Mike Snyder. Pleasure to have you guys all on our panel. So if you are interested in a PDH certificate or an operator CEH, please send me an email and let me know what you're interested in getting. And to wrap things up, panel, I'll throw it out to you guys. Any last words of wisdom or anything you want to share with us? Rob, anything?
No, but I think, I think one of the biggest things you can do is you can't play a lot of the stuff you learn from going through this stuff. So getting together after the fact, when something happens, it's unexpected, and really kind of debriefing and going through our lessons learned is really important.
Yeah, good point. John Bright, any final words of wisdom for our audience?
No, Rob just covered my big point, but be safe, everybody. Good luck.
He's always taking your answer, isn't he?
Sorry, John.
Joe Gallagher, any final words?
Just to highlight what we mentioned about the dedication of the operators in 282, because in a storm event, we're out there trying to make sure the facilities are working so everyone else has water or wastewater. But a lot of times there's the same kind of storm damage as the homes of the operators too, and they're have that worry in the back of their mind while they're trying to do their job.
Yeah. Mike, any final words?
I would just say, if you're a wastewater system, please join PAWarn. We'd love to have you, and we think it's a great network to belong to. And also, if you're an engineer, please recommend to your clients to join PAWarn, your water and wastewater systems. We really appreciate that.
Excellent. And Eric, I see a friend of yours mentioned that Eric Moore, one time on a job site, it was raining and Eric shared his umbrella. So Ahmed will always be thankful that you saved him out there. Any final words of wisdom, Eric?
Well, I was going to say something about safety, but I didn't think anyone would take the guy with the eye patch seriously when he talked about safety. So I'll say, talk to your local EMA person, your emergency management folks. These things affect your entire community. They affect the stormwater, the water, the sewer, the people, the emergency responders. It's essential to stay in touch with them. And oftentimes they're in touch with folks at the state level that can help you with funding for things like emergency response. And it's just important to keep the dialogue open, because it's something that doesn't happen very often, although it is obviously more frequent these days. But I know we would have been up the creek without a paddle if it hadn't been for some of the local EMA folks helping us out when we needed it. And we in turn tried to help them out when they needed it.
Yeah, no, our industry is absolutely amazing. And that's one reason I love working in it, the way we all come together and help each other when we need it most. So huge thank you to our audience. You'll notice when you sign off, there's a quick 2-question poll, absolutely anonymous. If you could respond, it really helps us in planning our upcoming roundtables to make sure we're giving you what you want and need. Huge thank you to my panel. I love you guys. This is so cool and so much fun to hear your stories and the tragedies and successes and ways we can all help each other and be better in the future. And I always wrap up our roundtables by saying magical things happen when you bring together passionate people. So I thank you all for your passion, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.